Draw out Sauron's armies. Then we gather our full strength and march on the Black Gate.
Sauron will suspect a trap. We will not take the bait.
At the very end of The Lord of the Rings, one decision seems almost impossible to understand. Why would Sauron, the most dangerous strategist in Middle-earth, abandon caution and throw nearly everything he had against a tiny army standing before the Black Gate? Aragorn's force was hopelessly outnumbered. They posed no real military threat. They could never conquer Mordor. And yet, Sauron reacted exactly as they wanted him to. But what if the battle at the Black Gate was never meant to be won? What if Aragorn's march was actually a carefully constructed trap? And more importantly, why was it a trap Sauron could not afford to ignore? To answer that, we have to understand the one fatal assumption that blinded the Dark Lord in the final days of the War of the Ring. Welcome back to Middle-earth Explained. Let's get started.
Behold the sword of Elendil.
To understand why the Black Gate worked, we first need to understand something about Sauron himself. For all his intelligence, Sauron had one enormous blind spot. He could not imagine anyone willingly destroying the One Ring. That sounds strange at first. After all, the ring had already slipped from his grasp multiple times. Isildur took it. It was lost in the Anduin. Gollum possessed it for centuries. Bilbo found it beneath the Misty Mountains. Frodo carried it out of the Shire. But from Sauron's perspective, the ring always corrupted its bearer eventually. Power was its purpose. Whoever possessed it would ultimately try to use it. And that assumption was not unreasonable. Throughout history, even the wisest figures feared the temptation of the ring.
Take it, Gandalf. Take it.
No, Frodo.
You must take it.
You cannot offer me this ring.
I'm giving it to you.
Don't tempt me, Frodo.
Gandalf refused it. Galadriel refused it. Elrond never sought it. They understood that attempting to wield Sauron's weapon would only create another tyrant. Sauron knew this. What he could not comprehend was humility. He could not understand sacrifice. The idea that someone would carry the greatest weapon in Middle-earth all the way into Mordor simply to destroy it was completely outside his way of thinking. As a result, Sauron spent the final stages of the war searching for a rival, not a ring-bearer, and that misunderstanding would allow Aragorn to play directly into the Dark Lord's fears.
Long have you hunted me. Long have I eluded you.
Those fears grew dramatically after one critical moment. When Aragorn revealed himself to Sauron through the palantír of Orthanc, he did far more than challenge the Dark Lord's authority. He confirmed exactly what Sauron already suspected. From Sauron's perspective, Aragorn was not merely the heir of Isildur. He was the descendant of the man who had once taken the ring from his hand. Now that same bloodline had returned, leading armies, rallying kingdoms, and openly declaring its presence. To Sauron, the conclusion seemed obvious. The ring had been found, and Aragorn intended to use it. After all, what else could explain the sudden confidence of the West? Why would a scattered alliance of men dare to confront Mordor unless they possessed some new source of power? Sauron could see Gondor recovering. He could see Rohan victorious after Helm's Deep. He could see Aragorn claiming the paths of the dead and emerging stronger than ever. Each event appeared to support the same terrifying possibility. A new Ring Lord was rising. This was exactly the scenario Sauron feared most. Not the destruction of the ring, but another powerful ruler mastering it and turning its strength against him. And when Aragorn later marched directly toward the Black Gate, Sauron believed he was witnessing the opening move of that challenge.
Let the Lord of the Black Land come forth! Let justice be done upon him!
The march to the Black Gate was one of the most reckless military operations in the history of Middle-earth. Aragorn, Gandalf, and the captains of the West knew they could not defeat Mordor in open war. Their entire force numbered only around 7,000 men. Against them stood the vast armies of Sauron, drawn from Mordor and allied lands across the east and south. There was no path to victory, at least not on the battlefield.
March on the Black Gate.
We cannot achieve victory through strength of arms.
But we can give Frodo his chance if we keep Sauron's eye fixed upon us.
The true objective was something far more dangerous, to force Sauron to look in the wrong direction. Every mile they marched toward Mordor increased the risk. If Sauron saw through the deception, Frodo and Sam would be trapped inside enemy territory, with no hope of reaching Mount Doom. Everything depended on convincing the Dark Lord that Aragorn represented the real threat. And remarkably, the plan worked. The captains of the West behaved exactly as a newly empowered Ring Lord might.
This day we fight! Men of the West!
They advanced boldly despite overwhelming odds. They challenged Sauron openly. They marched straight toward the heart of his realm, as though they possessed a hidden strength capable of changing the course of the war. To Sauron, it all made perfect sense. What he was witnessing, he believed, was not a distraction. It was the beginning of his greatest nightmare. If you enjoy the video so far, don't forget to drop a like. From the moment Aragorn's army began its march, Sauron faced a problem he could not ignore. Even if he suspected a trick, the risk was simply too great. Imagine the situation from his perspective. An heir of Isildur had suddenly emerged from obscurity. The kingdoms of men were uniting. Victories were piling up against his forces. And now that same heir was advancing toward Mordor with astonishing confidence despite being hopelessly outnumbered. If Aragorn truly possessed the ring, every moment mattered. Sauron knew the ring amplified ambition. Its bearer would not remain weak forever. Given enough time, a powerful leader could gather allies, build armies, and eventually challenge him directly. Waiting was therefore the most dangerous option available. He had to act first. This is what made the Black Gate such a brilliant trap. Aragorn and Gandalf were not asking Sauron to make a mistake. They were forcing him into the only decision that seemed rational. The Dark Lord concentrated his attention on the approaching army. His commanders prepared for battle. His gaze turned toward the Black Gate and the challenge standing before him. Meanwhile, far behind his armies and beyond the focus of his searching eye, two exhausted hobbits were moving closer and closer to Mount Doom, exactly where Sauron least expected them to be.
I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you!
Sauron's mistake was not the result of arrogance alone. From his perspective, the evidence seemed to point in one direction. Consider everything that had happened in the months leading up to the march on the Black Gate. A hobbit carrying precious items had been captured near Mordor's borders. The mithril coat once worn by Frodo was discovered, yet the ring itself was nowhere to be found. To Sauron, that raised an obvious question. If the ring-bearer had been captured or killed, where had the ring gone? At almost the same time, Aragorn openly challenged him through the palantír. Gondor survived the siege of Minas Tirith. The forces of the West suddenly began acting with a confidence that seemed completely disconnected from their actual military strength. When these events were viewed together, they appeared to tell a clear story. Someone had taken possession of the ring. And who was the most likely candidate? The heir of Isildur, a man with a legitimate claim to rule, growing influence across Middle-earth, and the courage to challenge Mordor directly. By the time Aragorn reached the Black Gate, Sauron was no longer merely suspicious. He believed the pieces already fit together.
And who is this? Isildur's heir. It takes more to make a kid than a broken elvish blade.
Everything came down to a single moment. As Aragorn and the captains of the West stood before the Black Gate, Sauron committed fully to the battle. His armies poured out of Mordor. The mouth of Sauron delivered his threats. Thousands of orcs, trolls, and Easterlings moved to crush the tiny force that had dared challenge him. The trap had worked. Sauron's attention was fixed entirely on the army before him. He was preparing for the final confrontation with what he believed was a rival ringlord. Then, at the very moment his victory seemed certain, disaster struck.
Look, Mr. Frodo. That doorway. We're almost there.
Inside Mount Doom, Frodo and Sam had reached the cracks of Doom. For the first time, the ring entered the one place where Sauron had never imagined it would be taken. And when the ring was finally destroyed, Sauron understood the truth far too late. The army at the Black Gate had never been the real threat. It had been a distraction, a sacrifice, a final gamble designed to keep the Dark Lord looking outward while his doom approached from within the very heart of his own kingdom. In the end, the Black Gate was never about defeating Sauron in battle. It was about defeating him psychologically. Aragorn and Gandalf understood the one weakness the Dark Lord could never overcome: his inability to imagine anyone rejecting power. Every decision Sauron made at the end of the war was based on that fatal assumption. The march to the Black Gate simply gave him exactly what he expected to see. And while his armies gathered for a war that never truly mattered, the real battle was already being won in the fires of Mount Doom.
I'm glad to be with you, Samwise Gamgee. Here at the end of all things.
If you like this kind of video, join the channel and leave a like for more content like this. It really helps me out. Thanks for watching, and as always, see you on the next one.